Welcome to Empowered by AI, the podcast for women entrepreneurs ready to harness AI to take their businesses to the next level. I'm your host, Michelle Muncy-Silva, founder of Innovative AI Studios. You may have left corporate life to start this entrepreneurial journey, but you don't have to go it alone. Here, you'll find a supportive community of like-minded women and an invaluable thought partner each week, as my guests and I share actionable insights you can use right away. So let's dive in together. I am ready to talk to you about your incredible career through philanthropy, through nonprofit leadership, and now AI integration. I really want to hear, and I'm sure the audience will as well, how you transitioned into exploring this intersection between these seemingly disparate groups.
Yeah. And it is one of those moments, Michelle, where I keep finding myself looking around like I'm the person, I'm the one. But then when I have to explain why, I'm like, oh no, I'm actually really well positioned to help the sector navigate this new tool, this new upskilling moment that we're in. And the reason it's me is because I spent 20 years in philanthropy. I spent 20 years exploring how does this system work? What do the nonprofits need? Created a lot of really important conversations about process, about people who are part of these conversations, and ultimately about digital transformation because nonprofits have so much data and they're often not using it to make those informed decisions. So now we've added AI to the mix, right? So if you're already on a Salesforce instance, you now have Einstein. If you're already in the Microsoft ecosystem, now you have Copilot, right? It's happening that fast where all of a sudden it's at your fingertips and you're expected to know how to navigate this tool. I know from 20 years in philanthropy that people, process, and tools are the pillar of how we're going to get anything done. And in our sector in particular, the people part of the equation is really important because we haven't come here as data scientists. We haven't come here as engineers and coding mavens. We have come here as people who care a lot about a cause, about a community, about the people that they want to see supported and thriving. So we have a sector that runs on relationship. We have processes that mostly we've developed, right? We're not corporates that are driving towards ROI and have really clear marching orders and how to get that red into the black, right? That's a really clear way of assessing what you've done at the end of the day. In the nonprofit world, we have processes that are helping us distribute funds to take care of our communities. Sometimes that happens with digital tools. Sometimes that happens just based on relationship and the way the ecosystem moves with degrees of separation from the resources to the volunteers. And all of that requires different technologies that are helping facilitate those conversations. So the people, the process, and the tools all need to be moving together. And so how I come to this space is one of deep exploration of risk mitigation and compliance, right? We have dictates as private grant-making organizations that we must follow, or we can't write those checks to the nonprofits. The IRS will shut us down. And so if that is not our getting from red to black, that's our demonstrating that we're doing charitable work, that we're having positive impact, that we're moving in the right direction. How do we assess that? And that comes back to this impact conversation. And that brings us right back to the people, right? What is success? What does that look like? And when we're talking about caring for communities, that's really complicated to assess and look at. And so someone like me who has a depth of experience with the people in the process and have dedicated myself to learning how do these tools work so that we can get the resources to the people who can do the incredible work, that's what I'm here for. And so when I look at why am I in this seat, in this position, it's because I've spent a lot of time learning the ecosystem, understanding how the dots connect, and then continuing to explore and innovate. How do we use these tools for our purposes that are driving towards impact and not ROI?
Mm-hmm. And you emphasize keeping that human in the loop constantly, right? That idea that it's relationship first, human first. And why is this? So many times we feel like, oh, I have a tool I have to learn. And you're flipping it on its head. It's not about the tool. It's about, would you say it's about the problem we're trying to solve?
100%. And that's where I think, again, going back to the ROI impact dichotomy that I've created, is ROI is the business model. Really simple. Either you're making money or you're losing money. It's really clear to see if you are hitting your marks. The objective is really cool. We are really simple and easy to articulate in corporate, right? Cool, because we're going to build these widgets and everyone's going to love them and everyone's going to buy them, right? Really simple, straightforward. In the nonprofit space, we have both a business model, right? We need to stay out of the red. We need to make sure that we can pay the rent, pay the insurance, pay the salaries, all of that. And we have this additional thing called an impact model. Did we reach our communities in the way we hoped? Did the people receive the resources, the tools, to have a positive impact as we understand that positive impact? And we being as collaborative and collective as possible, because just because we think free school lunches are the answer to the problem, it may be we actually need free school lunches, after school education, and more pencils and markers in the classrooms, right? Like that trifecta is going to get things to move. The school lunches are not going to be sufficient on their own. But that's also where the data wrangling, right? We're bringing in this tool to help people align around the vision. Again, back to the business model, impact model. Business model is just sell those damn widgets. Impact model is keep the lights on and take care of the people. And so when we're talking about a shared vision, if a philanthropy has dedicated itself to free school lunches for everyone, and we're hearing that's not the whole answer, how do you start to pivot? How do you start to align around a shared vision? So again, when we just go down to the nuts and bolts of what are the business models of these different sectors, we have really different guiding lights. ROI, clear, established. Impact, that's going to take some time to define. It's going to take some time to measure it. And guess what? If the people are like, all we want to do is free school lunches and all we want is after, none of it goes anywhere. So it doesn't matter what kind of fancy tools you throw at the problem, we're still not solving or creating the kind of impact that we want to see for these communities. So it really does get flipped on its head. It doesn't matter which tool you throw at the problem. If you're not aligned around, we call these things the wicked problems. If you're not aligned around what the vision is to resolve that wicked problem, and then how your mission specifically is going to help address that problem, now you're starting to build the impact model, which is basically like a theory of change, right? If we do this, then we expect to see that happen. Same conversation with technology, which is usually an accelerant. It's usually going to help make things happen quicker, faster, with less expense. In the nonprofit world, and probably in the for-profit also, that line is not straight. That is not a linear journey at all, from people through process to tools. And that's where we humans who happen to understand the tools a little bit better really want to show up and bring folks along to understand, yeah, no, I get it. You don't want to have to learn this new tool. It's going to be a learning curve, right? It's a learning curve. It's going to be difficult. But guess what? It will get easier as you engage. It will get more efficient. It will get more effective. Also, this is not ROI. It's going to be really hard to demonstrate that, right? It's going to be more challenging to demonstrate the value of ROI in the impact equation than it will be to demonstrate the value of something like AI in ROI conversations, right? Really easy to do that math and say, oh, look, we saved this much time, as opposed to on the social sector side where we reached more people. We were able to distribute more lunches. We alleviated pain, right? Those are things that are not as easy to count. And so when we're talking about, was that tool an effective ad? It's a little bit more complicated to talk about. And there's probably more resistance to the initial upskilling because we're here for a vision. We're here for people and community, as opposed to how much money can we make for this company selling widgets so that we get our nice annual bonus. Two totally different conversations, same people, process, tool, foundation.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you talk about that kind of cognitive overload, right? Because we're putting so much energy into moving the needle on a issue that we're passionate about. Impact first, right? That's always the priority. And so there's this cognitive saturation that
Yes.
can happen where I am putting all of my energy into that impact. Can you share an example? How do you broach then? Because I know even for me, the first time someone tried to introduce even Chat GPT to me, I was like, I cannot handle one more thing. I
Yeah.
can't. So how
Yeah.
can you share an example of how you help
Yep.
the cognitively saturated crowd?
So confidently, I say this too, because as a cognitive scientist, that's my training, my background. Again, why me? Why am I so adept at navigating this conversation? It's because I studied the cognitive overload. I understand how that's affecting the individuals who are trying to engage with these tools. And I have a lot of empathy for the very human fear response. Am I losing my job? Is this thing going to take over? What if I can't figure it out? Is my boss going to get mad and fire me? All of that fear response is totally rational, logical human responses to something new, right? There is nothing wrong with that. The way we overcome any fear response is we start figuring out, how do we find the levity in this, right? How do we get past a fear response to something that is not actually life threatening, right? We're not going to die. AI is not coming to kill us
We
yet.
can't break it.
So it's something that we can play with, and we can see, how does it fit into our world? And one of the ways I recommend doing that is starting with your personal, really safe, right? We're not talking about professional. We're not talking about your source of income. We're talking about, here's a new tool. You run a life in this current world, and that means that you need efficiency, right? Who doesn't need an efficiency or two? So one of my first use cases was creating a vacation itinerary. I'm going on vacation with my family. I'm over on Expedia. I'm on TripAdvisor. I'm in Google, making myself absolutely crazy with it. And I'm like, I know there's a new tool called large language models, right? Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, all of these are capable of assisting me. Pop in your question. I demoed it with somebody else who, personal exploration, they were starting to learn about electric trains in California. He'd love to see that happen. He's a longtime conservationist, really cares about public transportation, happens to be vested in California. I demoed ChatGPT. I was like, let's check it out. I don't know anything about electric trains in California and what that could. And I just demoed for him how far. And the demo I did was actually Perplexity. So we hopped into Perplexity, and I was like, we need sources, we need documentation, you have a really clear question here, and I want to support your research on this topic. Let's dig in. Blew his mind. He was just like, oh my gosh. And it was research that he had himself participated in, right? Like, he knew the sources. He was like, oh yeah, that's valid. That's really good. There were a couple pieces he wasn't familiar with, like the research keeps moving, and he had checked out for a year or two, right? And here it is. It's all like, all of a sudden he's up to speed, and he can re-engage with that conversation in that community if it's something that is of interest to him. And so I think that's an area. One of the assignments, Michelle, I gave, I'm an AI educator. So at Civic Hall, Good Academy AI, there was someone who was asking, okay, so how do we practice? What does it look like to practice with this tool? And I was like, what if you put in a prompt? I want to create an adult learning journey over the 2-week holiday. And I'm in New York. So I was like, how about medieval arts, right? There's tons of medieval art around. I don't know a lot about it, but you could put in the prompt, say, let's learn about this. Let's do 2 to 3 museum visits. Please include the cloisters, because that's a really cool spot. And all of a sudden you have this beautiful adult learning curriculum to learn about something that's just of interest to you, with local places that you can visit and go experience that thing that you're curious about learning about. So I don't think you need to start with high stakes. I need data analysis and I need my emails automated. Like, start with something simple that's exciting and interesting to you, that you'd like to find some efficiency around your learning journey or your understanding of a particular topic.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you're so passionate about making it personal, right? It's, if it's valid to you in that moment, then you're connected to it.
Yes,
I love
exactly.
that.
And that's where the practice comes, right? Like, you don't want to practice if you're not getting better, or if you're interested, or if so, to feel that you're making progress in little chunks every day. My kids just started playing instruments, right? And so they're young enough that the instructors are like, they don't need to do a whole half hour every day. They just need to be on it daily. They just need to get their fingers used to the piano, blowing into the flute. You just have to get comfortable with this new thing, because this is now the world that we exist in, right? And so the Michelle, the example I go back to often is with the laptops and the computers that are now ubiquitous. You don't go into an office place, you don't travel without your tools. And so with AI, it's going to be really similar. And so the analogy I've come up with as we're trying to figure out laptops, nice contained tools that now we know how to navigate, we know how to deal with. AI feels like sticky honey, right? It's everywhere. It's a little annoying. Eventually, we're going to know what to do with it and how to make it this cute little contained tool that we can use well. But right now, it's just everywhere and sticky and annoying. And so I also want to empathize with the people who are just like sick of talking about it. Like, I get it, but also it's not going away until we figure out, like,
Right.
how do we use this for ourselves and for our benefit? We're going to have trouble.
And I quote you frequently. That's one of my favorite phrases,
Scary.
by the way. You get talked about all over the place. If your ears are burning, it's me. Because I'm like,
Oh,
sticky honey,
man.
people. Rachel
Yeah.
Kimber says sticky honey. Hang on to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when we find like a good container and a good distributor, right? That's what we're trying to build now. That's what we're trying to figure out. And that's where when we get overwhelmed with all the tools, did you see this tool? Did you try this tool? There is going to be another few years of that. And it's going to be really overwhelming. And we have to figure out, where do we want to put our energy and our attention? Because it's going to be changing so fast. And if we want to mitigate that burnout, if we want to not get overwhelmed by it, we have to figure out and really make conscious decisions. And this is where I go into some of the values and the leadership conversation, because only you can decide when to use the tool. Only you decide if it's going to help create efficiencies, because often right now there aren't enterprise level guidance, right? That's a new emergent thing. I'm hoping 2025 we hit it hard, where there's a lot more enterprise level guidance for individual users. But right now, while you're trying to navigate, what does it mean to be transparent? What does it mean to be accountable when I'm using this tool? You need to navigate that yourself. And that's a huge load to carry, right? If you value transparency and you're a fundraiser and you know that you might put your funding in jeopardy if you put at the top co-written with AI support, that's going to create friction right now. And so how do you navigate those moments? You look at your values. You look about, what does it mean for you? Do you need to sit down and have a conversation with the donor? Do you need to be open and clear about how your nonprofit is using AI tools right now? Or do you want to let the dust settle and just realize, okay, everyone's using the tool, everyone's figuring it out. Let's not put big bright red letters at the top that AI supported this. Let's see how we go. And in 3 months, let's revisit the conversation. Let's meet with some of our donors. And the reason I'm advising this caution is because Candid did some research. Candid is a wonderful repository of all kinds of research and information. And they just published a piece where they asked private grant makers if they would accept proposals that used AI to support the writing of the proposal. 23% of private grant makers said that they would not accept those proposals. I also know that the Center for Effective Philanthropy has done some incredible research on the burnout crisis that is hitting nonprofits and especially fundraisers and development folks incredibly hard. So if they are trying to find efficiencies in their work, and 23% of donors are saying, we will not accept your proposal if you use AI at all, we have a massive disconnect in the sector. The fundraisers are dropping like flies, right? They are just getting churned horribly. And then we have this tool that can help create some efficiency. But the people who hold the purse strings are saying, not sure how we feel about this tool. Complicated space to be a fundraiser in right now.
That runs so many parallels, I think, to education as well, because of the fact that you've got students that are already using the tools. You've got teachers that have the whole gamut of response to it. Everything from what you're talking about, it's the end of the world, I can't stand it, to we need to be doing this like yesterday. And then you have districts that are unable to navigate that. So they just say, we're banning it.
Yeah.
And so there's just this reality that we're all struggling with, where it's, okay, where can I use this? Where can I not? And who's getting access to it and who's not?
Yes.
So there's a whole equity and access and inclusion conversation.
Yes.
And I know you're very passionate about that as well. And do you think that there's space for AI to support this goal of advancing equal access advancing equitable inclusion in these conversations, is there still a safe space for that?
Yeah, I think 100%. I think it's just how much time will it take for us to be able to have those more open, transparent conversations? And this goes back to conversations about trust-based philanthropy, right? Can we trust our nonprofit partners, or are we the accountability wardens who are going to make sure that they've checked every box and crossed every T? And again, back to that spectrum of experience. And I think the way I like to think about it is a bell curve, right? There's the people who are just not going to touch it, will forever stay hard where they are. The folks who retired when computers came out, right? There is a bastion of people who aren't going to move, have lots of reasons to not move, and we're not going to move them. That's okay. Then there's the front edge, right? We're those early adopters, the people who are out there championing the new thing. And then there's the middle 50% who are like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. What do I do? And I think that's where my call to grants managers in particular, because within the philanthropies, the bastions of resources, they're the ones who need to move to help the sector, the nonprofit sector, begin to grapple with how do we engage with AI? What are the rules in terms of engagement? And so grants managers are, and this is the compliance role, the risk mitigation role that I played for 20 years in philanthropy, was around how do we safely get money to areas of the world where there's incredible complication on the US side of the legalese, on the foreign government side of the legalese, lots. And then there's this huge gray area right in the middle, right? So navigating that gray area, that's what my expertise is. That's what grants managers do, is we figure out, you want to send money to this organization in Russia or India or China. We grants managers figure out, how do we get money into those countries? How do we do it safely? How do we do it within compliance? So rules, loopholes, and norms are the three pieces that, God bless him, Jon Stewart outlined. And I was like, I think we've got something here. And so
I
his
saw your
commentary,
post about that. I loved it.
thank you. It was really political. Jon Stewart was feeling hot and fiery after the election about the way the Democrats cling to the rules, right? Those are the rules. We can't change them. And then Republicans are like, there's a loophole. We're creating a new norm. And so as grants managers, again, taking the whole political bleh out of it, we're just going to talk about it as the IRS has regulations. Other foreign governments have regulations. There's a huge gray area in the middle. So we have a rule. You cannot do X, Y, and Z. Okay. Other government, you cannot do A, B, and C. Okay. There's a whole range of things in between them that are okay. Right? And so that's where we grants managers find what, it's not a great term, a loophole, but it's about translating that gray space into something that is actionable, as opposed to it being a total rule. That's the rule. That's the way it is. Lawyers are excellent at finding loopholes and setting new precedents, right? So that's what we need to do with AI. And we need to create new norms. Is it normal to write a proposal with AI? I think it should be. I think that's just the way it should be. And so as we move away from conversations of efficiency, how do I get my job done faster, to conversations about collaboration, how do we work more effectively together, right? We're all building our individual efficiencies, but that's where conversations about what is the proposal, the grant proposal, the thing that nonprofits submit to get the money, philanthropies read, decide if they're going to give the money, right? That's where that transaction is happening, through this written document that used to be handwritten and postmarked. That was the norm. We've moved really far away from that as a norm, where it would be laughable. We do laugh about it, right? Voulet, crappy funding practices, he will laugh and make it very public if some funder has requested a handwritten proposal with a postmark on it. That doesn't happen anymore. And so what's happening in this AI moment is similar. There aren't really rules out there. We don't need to create loopholes yet, but we need to decide what those norms for AI engagement within the social sector, within the education spaces, what do those look like? So we can start figuring out, is that a rule that is immutable and immovable? Or is there a little bit of gray area that we can interpret and move toward action, right? Instead of it being an obstacle and a stop that says, this is not happening, we're not moving forward. Rules exist for that reason, really important. Some rules are ready for reinvention. Another analogy I like to throw around, Michelle, and this will be the last and I'll stop rambling for a minute, is around the auto industry. what the auto industry did to our pedestrian culture, right? There wasn't car culture at the time. We've moved past that. And now we have car culture. That didn't exist previous. We had carriage culture. We had horse culture. We had lots of things. But when the automobiles arrived, we didn't have rules for a while either. People just drove. In some countries, they still do, right? Like the rules vary based on the way we enforce them and decide that those are the norms around how we engage with these rules. But the rules keep us safe. I'm not worried about someone driving onto my front lawn. I'm not worried about someone blowing through an intersection and running a red light, right? These things do happen. Rules are broken, but they're there to keep us safe. They're there to make sure that there's a basic level of regulation that is keeping us as citizens safe. I'm all down for that. But to figure out what are the norms around using this new tool is going to take some time.
Yeah. I love that. You're making me think of a house, right? We have those foundational beams, right? With foundation, and then we have those beams that hold up. Those rules are there in the walls, but you're creating doors, you're creating windows.
Yes.
So
Oh, that's
that's
beautiful.
coming through.
Yes.
The wall is
Yes.
still there. It's there for that reason. It provides the structure. It gives the containment.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
totally what that's making me think of.
Yes. And I think nonprofit organizations all need to revisit their foundational. What is our vision? People, process, tools. How are we deploying that to get to that vision? But the vision's clear. We've got our North Star. We know where we're going. Does AI fit?
Mm-hmm.
Are we collecting the right data to assess that we've moved in that direction? And these are conversations like take it or leave it with AI. Like nonprofits have been grappling with digital transformation, which is making sure all your staff have laptops and Zoom licenses and access to SharePoint, like really basic technology foundation that needs to be in place before you start throwing AI at things and overcomplicating already lean, shoestring organizations. So I think AI 100% has a place at most nonprofits, but figuring out how to do that in a way that doesn't overwhelm your people, that doesn't make a mess of your process, and is adding in tools at a pace that the organization can handle, I think is where the challenge is.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to dive into with you just a little bit is, for example, you've talked about involving more stakeholders in the grant making process, right? That's a priority. How do you see technology and generative AI specifically really helping bring those voices to the table so that shared vision can move forward?
Yes. I talk a lot about feedback loops, right? Close the feedback loop. The name of my company, Full Circle Impact Solutions, right? Don't just let it trail off and not capture the learning. And so for me, that's what we're doing right now as we're introducing this new tool is we're moving slowly, we're moving thoughtfully, and we're really focusing on, did that move us in the direction that we wanted to? Did that upset staff? Did it disrupt things? So making sure that we're closing that feedback loop. How do we do that? Where do we begin? First of all, you are a senior leader at some enterprise organization. It can be educational, it can be nonprofit, it can be like you name it. You happen to be the person in charge, right? You have some decision-making power. You need to find out who your secret cyborgs are, right? You need to find out who of your frontline staff is already using this tool, already has use cases. Senior leadership, important decision makers for the future of meeting the vision of your organization, and the folks who are actually working to meet that vision need to sit down together and have that initial conversation, right? That's the first. We're creating the feedback loop. The senior leadership has to build a policy. We need to decide, are we using AI or not? When are we using it? Who's using it? What data? Those questions must get answered. Senior leadership, as Anne likes to say, is uniquely unqualified to answer that. They may not have very many AI use cases. They're sitting in strategy conversations. Their head is focused on why, how, right? AI can support that. They can bring the data to the conversation, but you're the decision maker. You're paid the big bucks because you decide what is best for this organization's mission meeting goals. You may not know that if you're not talking to your frontline workers who have just developed 5 different cases for AI and you're worried about PII and you're like, we're not using it at all. And your frontline workers are like, but we're not even touching the PII data. We don't need that. We're just creating efficiencies within our own workflow. If you haven't taken the time to close that feedback loop where senior leadership writing the policy, frontline workers out there scrambling to get through their days, if those two are not talking, we're just going to have ongoing problems. And then that extends to not just the senior leaders and the frontline workers, but who are your collaborators in that space? Who are your tech partners? Do they understand where you're trying to get to? You don't speak tech. They don't speak philanthropy. You two need to come up with a shared language so you can keep closing that feedback loop. Because if you're not, then all of a sudden, senior leadership, you're pissed off that your tech consultant hasn't nailed what they said they'd nail. And there's no conversation about why or what happened or how do we get back on track. And so for me, closing that feedback loop is everything. And so many organizations will just keep running on to the next thing. And it's like you just lost all of that knowledge and all of that learning and all of that opportunity to do things better in service of your mission.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm wondering. Do you think that there's that constant pursuit of the next thing because we're band-aiding? Or band-aiding. I think I just made up a word.
Yeah, no, making up words.
A band-aid on something as opposed to actually going through the implementation process, the discussion process. Do you think that's part of the fear of adoption?
Yeah, and I think that's where trust-based philanthropy, right? I'm a philanthropist. I write really big checks. This is wonderful. Great role. I am not an expert on homelessness. I'm not an expert on poverty. And yes, program officers are hired because they are experts in those things. However, they may not have lived experience. They may not live in Front, Ohio, where this is currently happening. And there's a whole different ecosystem that is contributing to these issues, right? So there's a need to make sure that you have the right people contributing to those conversations and that you trust them. And so as I collaborate with folks, which I do all the time, I'm like, I start with trust. If I do not trust you, I will not collaborate with you. I can't. I don't know how to do that. And so when you are engaging with any vendors, I like to point to tech vendors because they speak such a different language from most of the people that I engage with in the nonprofit education spaces. And so you don't speak the same language. You don't have the same knowledge set. You need to work together. You need to trust each other to some level. And as we're exploring AI, is that just the next shiny thing? I hope that you have a tech consultant that you trust deeply and have worked with on maybe 2 or 3 tech projects before this moment. So you can turn to them and say, hey, is AI going to help us out or is it just going to make things messier? And if you don't have that person, that's probably who you want to find first. And if it's your secret cyborg on staff who knows how to talk technology, well, good, bring them on. They're now on your AI committee. They're just a development associate. That's fine. That's fine. You need their expertise because they understand things and can speak in a language that you might not be adept at doing. So making sure that the right stakeholders are around the table and that you trust each other is how you keep from chasing shiny objects. Mm-hmm. I think that happens in so many places, Michelle, technology especially, but in philanthropy where we're like, oh, there's this new project that's going to solve all, and is it going to solve all the things? Or can we make sure that we have the right stakeholders around the table so we can talk about it critically, really examine what's possible, and then action it? And so I think that's a really big thing for me, Michelle, is going from intent to action. We can spend so much time talking about it, exploring it, but you eventually have to trust the players on your team to take a step, to go in a direction, and then assess it. Was that worthwhile? And with AI, assessment doesn't have to take forever. It's a quick conversation, survey, prompt, whatever. Evaluation does not need to be a 6-month project. Evaluation is, okay, we did this thing. Did it move us in the direction we want to go? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's keep doing that, or let's figure out how we keep going in that direction.
Yeah. And as a futurist, that's one of the many hats that you wear, right? What ethical considerations have to be brought to the table when people are moving forward like this?
Yes. And so as soon as you say ethics, my mind goes to my cheeky question, because everyone was talking about AI and ethics. It needs to be ethical. And I'm like, whose ethics? Mm-hmm. Whose? And so that's my starting point with that conversation is, yes, having studied moral philosophy for a lot of years, there are some ethics that I would not ascribe to for my own personal, right? That's not how I roll. And if that's how you roll, that's okay. But that goes back to the conversation of what are our values as individuals? What are our values as a department, as an enterprise, as a sector? And like, how do we show up and demonstrate those values? And so it's fine if you work at a corporate and you don't trust your technology partners and you just want to show me the numbers. That's cool. That's fine. That's corporate. Nonprofit world, it's a different scenario. We care about relationships. We care about trust. We care about impact. So the business model isn't sufficient to say, we got there. There's this whole impact theory of change conversation that requires a different level of alignment around the ethics. And if you haven't aligned around this is, and so for example, another value I throw around is accessibility, right? Your organization values accessibility. You've put screen readers on, you have formatted slide decks that make it easier for people with visual impairment. You have doubled down on accessibility. In my career, accessibility took on an international lens. And accessibility meant, do people have laptops? Do they have mobile phones? Do they have access to the internet? So when we talk about these are the things we value, and this is what our ethics say are the right answer, we need to make sure that we've really unpackaged that. And again, doesn't mean it takes 6 months to 12 years. It doesn't need to be an ongoing journey. It's just, this is what we around the table understand accessibility to be. This is what we understand ethical behavior to be. Another term, integrity, right? We talk a lot about we have to operate with integrity, right? Trust, integrity, these things go together. I think, unfortunately, in countries where corruption is rampant, integrity takes on a different way of operating than we understand it in our Western way, our US way of doing things. And so I think it's really important to unpackage those terms before we just dive in and say, we're doing this ethically. Okay, let's talk about what that means, because there's a lot of ways to interpret it. I think that goes back, Michelle, to when you talked about equity. This tool opens a whole equity can of worms also. What does it mean to operate equitably? Your organization needs to unpackage that. And maybe equitably is no AI ever. Okay, that's your definition. My definition would be, hey, especially if you are a second language learner and English isn't your first language, you should be using AI all the time for your personal correspondence. That could be policy at an organization that says, we're not using AI, but we want to make sure we're doing this in some equitable way. So if you're not speaking English as a first language, you can use it for your personal correspondence. So trying to give examples of how do you start to navigate the gray area? How do you figure out, how do we bring everyone along and set some pretty important rules to just test out? Because there are none, right? There are no rules right now.
Right.
So test them out, iterate on it, go back to that feedback loop, do some equity and ethics conversations with your staff, see how it lands for them. And maybe you start refining your definition. What does it look like to achieve impact at this organization? It can be with AI, it can be without AI. It can be with trust, it can be without trust, right? There are lots of ways to operate. And that's where the onus is on some of those senior leaders to decide, to figure out how are we going to show up and how am I going to advise my staff about why we've made this decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be 2025, Michelle. I think it's going to be all like, we have rules.
That's the goal. You are making my brain explode right now. I'm telling you, just so many implications for so many different industries. These conversations that have not started yet.
Yes.
And like you said, 2025, we're praying for it in 2025.
And I'm like, just get playful, right? Don't take it so seriously yet. Maybe rules are 2026, but we have to experiment with this tool. We have to figure out what's possible. And we senior leaders need to figure out if this tool is a right fit for our organization and then set some rules. And again, I'm not a huge fan of here is the dictate, but the reason it's important is because, for example, Samsung back in 2023, again, imagine a bunch of young engineers sitting around and now they know that these large language models are out there. They want efficiency. They want to get home. They want their 5 o'clock happy hour. So they took some code, some proprietary code from Samsung, popped it into the large language model, did some work. But the problem was that was Samsung's proprietary code, right? Corporate makes money by having things that are proprietary. And now these engineers just went and dumped it into a large language model, which means anyone can have access to it. The other question I got, Michelle, was around the policy creating is, what do you mean anyone can have access to it? I was like, hackers have long been capable of getting information for an organization, an individual that they have targeted, right? If you have the appropriate control set up, you might keep yourself a little bit safer. But if a hacker has identified you as a target, they're pretty good at what they do. And so I had someone from an international NGO with highly sensitive human rights data ask, should they be worried going into this next year about the fact that they don't have any policy in place, that they haven't upskilled and educated their staff? And I shared with them that Samsung story. And I was like, you may not have a target on your back now, but I have heard that we are moving into more of a surveillance state in 2025, right? There's going to be probably hyper surveillance on international NGOs, right? Moving money out of this country and into other countries. Like, that's already high risk. And so if that's what your nonprofit is doing, yes, I would be very concerned that you have a target on your back and that your data might be at higher risk then. And so when I share that story about Samsung, nonprofit, not Samsung, right? Who's coming after our data? Who cares if someone pops something in there? I'm like, that's why it's not a problem until it's a problem. And I don't want to see any of you nonprofits on the front page of Time magazine because you had some horrific hack. And so that's where play, low-lying fruit. My favorite example right now, Michelle, go through your employee handbook. Make that your exercise for 2025. Everyone gets to practice with AI. Everyone gets to sit around with this really low stakes project. We're going to go through the employee handbook and we're going to make sure that it's aligned and inclusive and compliant. That's low-lying fruit. Don't start with the PII. Don't go to the scary, sensitive data, and definitely don't put it in a large language model. So maybe create a policy so that your staff understand why we have to be cautious.
And you spend a lot of your time teaching these skills, right? You're spending a lot of time teaching nonprofits to integrate AI in a safe way. What do you think are some of the most transformative skills that learners take away from your course?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I think a confidence and playfulness, right? I think that's the biggest hurdle, right? Back to the people process tools. The people are just like, break it. You're just like, I don't want to put something in there. It's just, you're going on vacation. You're going to go visit your family. Have it put in something in your own personal life to just give it a play. Don't feel so overwhelmed, so high stakes. Just give it a try. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces of feedback I've gotten is when people leave my course, they feel more confident. And I think the other piece is to know that when you get into those ethical, sticky moments with AI, to know that you have the knowledge to navigate that, right? If you were Mr. Smith and you gave the organization, would you want your information just dumped into a large language model? I don't think so. So you might want to check with Mr. Smith first, right? You might want to redact your data. That's a big one, is just take his name out, take his birthday out, take all of the stuff out that ties it back to an individual person or an individual organization, right? You want to do your employee handbook, take out the name of the organization, just call it nonprofit. Pop the whole thing into ChatGPT. There's nothing risky if you have taken out the name of your organization, if you have taken out the name of the individuals, helping people get confident and then giving them some tips on how to navigate the risk. And because I'm in philanthropy, the billionaires always have targets on their back. We've been getting wire frauds from 1995 when the internet first started doing internet wire fraud. So we've had to deal with risk mitigation and compliance for a long time. And so stepping into this new space and helping people think about all the different components that might be needed at some point. And I go really far, Michelle. Again, I'm a futurist. Not many folks are thinking about what would it look like to have an AI audit. I'm already thinking about that, right? How we have financial audits every year. This is personal private data. Nonprofits hold that data. What kind of a government regulation might be put in place at some point to say, we need to have a regular audit? And other countries, again, this is not like rocket science to be putting the pieces together because places like India have already rolled out legislation like this. GDPR in Europe, right? Protecting individuals' data. So as the United States does or does not move in that direction, I think the social sector will, because again, we care about our relationships. We don't want to piss off Mr. Smith or the Ford Foundation. We're going to figure out how do we do this in relationship. And that's going to take time. That's going to take time and a lot of conversation and a lot of maybe missteps and course corrections, but we have to start. We have to start, and 2025 is the year to do that.
Yeah. And I'm really interested in some of the key things that you see these tools shaping for the future of philanthropy, for nonprofit work. Like, where do you see this in the next
Yeah.
5 to 10 years?
I think there's maybe three really exciting areas. One, we talked about the proposal, right? That is an antiquated process when things used to be postmarked and sent through the mail. Proposals need to get updated. Nonprofits are wasting a lot of time and energy across departments, right? They have to do financial, they have to do programmatic, they have to do communication, right? They have to do so much work to get that one proposal to you. Founder, right? Person who's going to write the check to you, that person. So I think proposals need to be reinvented. My personal pet project has been around closing that feedback loop, which is oral and alternate reporting, which is now so much easier. If you're going to ask a nonprofit to report about what they did with the money, you can have a conversation. Otter is right there for you. Zoom has transcription abilities. It's not difficult to start doing reporting for learning as opposed to reporting for accountability. So that's another really big pet project of mine. So proposals, reporting, and then the last piece, I just think it's almost comical the way we take like the due diligence so seriously, right? Like we are sending money, large checks to all of these nonprofits. We need to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do. Their finances, their governance, all of that stuff is in order. I received like a 2-hour training from Philanthropy New York back in 2014 on reading 990s, right? And so now my job is to take that 2 hours worth of knowledge and review portfolios worth of financial documents. I was reading 990s, which again, I became very adept at. I got really good at it. But we are entrusting non-CPA, non-lawyers to do this initial compliance assessment. This is an area that would be well met by AI, right? A 990 is publicly available information. You put it in with this is what a good balance sheet looks like. This is the way we might want to run some calculations to see what do they have in reserve. These are things that I did manually early in my career, right? Like when I was trying to figure out, like, how do I know that these numbers look good? How do I know that this 990 is for a sustainable nonprofit? I think a tool would be a fantastic way to start to mitigate some of the compliance review in partnership with AI. Again, human in the loop. I'm the expert. I'm the one who understands, after doing it multiple times, how we safely get money into Russia. But if someone else is doing the first pass, my little AI assistant, it's saving me mental space to do the more complicated, right? And so I think that's the beauty of AI. It's not taking your job. It's giving you space to not answer the 800 questions before you get to the and why. Why are we going to fund them? Why are they eligible? Why, right? Like, where's the justification? That's up here. The fact that they hit all the marks, AI can tell me that much faster. And then I can create a very good, beautiful narrative about what this 990 is telling us, as opposed to spending days doing calculations.
Okay, so I'm sensing a custom GPT in your future
Yes,
that
yes.
you have created with all of your knowledge that will help you make that a reality.
I hope so, Michelle. I'm having, again, like for me, it's a shiny new tool. It is fun to play with. It is a neat space to be exploring and figuring out how can it help, especially grants managers, having done that for 20 years. How can this tool help people who are tasked with administrative compliance, risk mitigation at major private foundations? And how can they do that more efficiently so that the nonprofits have the money that they need to do the good work? And that goes back, Michelle, to during the pandemic when I realized I'm not on this planet to rip down capitalism, right? I have now been handed the golden keys to create a more abundant society. But I did learn how to move the money really efficiently and effectively. And so when I realized that is what my career has prepared me for, I'm like, cool, that's what I'm going to do. I'm all in on making sure that nonprofits get the resources as efficiently and as quickly as we can get it to them so that they can do the awesome work.
I love that. And what is next for you? Can you share some upcoming projects or goals that
Oh,
you're working
yeah.
on?
I think the She Leads Society is going to be incredible. I can't wait to touch base with Anne Murphy and see what's simmering over there. We just had Festivus celebration, and that was super amazing. So, what's on the horizon in the new year is more educating. I will be working with the Good Academy AI, and so we'll be teaching virtually. Anne and I will be doing a few boot camps in the new year, so watch for that. We did one over the summer, if you guys remember the summer session, and then we had another in the fall. And it has been, again, not your usual AI training space because we do bring in conversations about values and leadership and how do you step up in your expertise, everything that you know, right? We talked about my 20 years of risk compliance, mitigation, et cetera. You have decades of experience in whatever it is that you do. And now you get to bring this AI tool to it. And it's really exciting to have people in our course who are excited to learn and then become the fifth graders that are teaching the third graders. I think there's a lot of that happening right now. Oh, and then I'll be in Florida in February speaking with the Florida Philanthropic Network. And so as I continue to educate philanthropy about what is possible with AI, we really need collaborative voices to keep explaining that this tool is being used for good, that it is powering equity, and that we have a burnout crisis, that however we feel about AI, it's likely going to help mitigate that problem. And so we should probably be exploring the potential of this tool because we are currently in a pretty severe crisis for our nonprofit staff.
Yeah. I have to be honest with you. I was a little biased when I attended AI Festivus because I kept entering that scholarship so I could win a boot camp session with
Yeah.
you because
Yes.
I
Oh,
would
Michelle.
love to learn from you more and more. And so I think you spending this time with us has been such a blessing. I so appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Michelle. It's a lot of fun to be exploring AI and bringing other folks along on the journey. So thank you for the opportunity.
I love it. Thank you for tuning in to Empowered by AI. If today's episode sparked ideas, don't wait. Follow the link in the show notes to visit innovativeaistudio.com and download your free resource created to help you put today's insights into practice. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes packed with more tips, tools, and inspiring stories. Until next time, stay empowered and keep innovating.